So it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon in Amsterdam, so I think it's about time to get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Very much welcome to this session by Holland FinTech and partners about the Anti-Money-Laundering Directive by the European Committee. Today we'll be doing a special session because this is about the launch of the AMLD5 web guide. Over the past several months, I must say, together with law firms CMS, Legaltree, Ploem, Stibbe, Van Doorne, Everett Sutherland, and Bureau Brandeis, we've been collaborating to actually acquire all the knowledge that there is about the latest anti-money laundering directive that has been implemented into national law. And of course, as the financial industry is quite under pressure to basically fulfill their role as the gatekeeper of the financial system and increasing focus on fighting financial crime, we see that the Anti-Money Laundering Directive is a very strong instrument by the policymakers to help keep the financial industry sane and safe. But it's not an easy task. So what we'll try to do today, together with the lawyers that have worked together on this, and not everyone is able to actually make it. There's even bigger teams also behind this. But we'd really like to highlight in any case how the firms have collaborated on this together with us to create a great guide. And today, hopefully, we'll be able to share some of the insights that are valuable for you to keep your company compliant and at the same time comply with the increasing need of society to actually pick up a more societal role in fighting financial crime. Very briefly, we're going to use the platform Hopin that you logged into. Just a really brief instruction on that is that on the right-hand side, you can see a chat function, as well as you can see the people that are in the session. If you click on them, you can actually establish a chat one-on-one or even invite people for a video call afterwards. And on the bottom left, you'll see the button networking that will direct you to at the end of the show. So we'll actually be able to help you connect to people that are in the meeting at the same time as well. It's the best we can do at the moment with everyone working remotely. Hopefully around summertime, we'll be able to get you all into one place and just share a drink to talk after about everything that's going on in the industry. But for now, this is the best we can do. And we think it's actually also, of course, helping us to do things in a different way. A brief introduction. This is the agenda of what we'll do. So all the participating law firms will briefly shed their light on the Anti-Money Laundering Directive. And afterwards, we'll end with a panel discussion to have a bit of a broader discussion on where things might be heading from here. And after that, hopefully you'll have a bit of time left to do some networking and connect directly towards the people that we have in the call today. Moving forwards, well, I said, my name is Don Ginsel. I founded Holland FinTech about almost 7 years ago already. And I'm looking forward to take you through this event and see how basically the next perspective on anti-money laundering will be implemented in the industry. And why are we actually talking about all this? I think you probably will have noticed that over the past years, regulatory action towards money laundering action has been really fierce. So I think already in 2019 we thought there was a record in fines that was issued, just like in 2014. But in 2020 we actually saw a further increase in the number and the amounts that were fined. And of course, this put quite some pressure on the financial industry and all the regulated entities in it, because the risk of getting a fine is quite a severe one. So we see that there's a really strong action, increased pressure from the regulators to keep track of AML activity, as well as stronger regulations and stronger demand from the policymakers to actually give a representation and actually take up an active role in preventing money laundering and fighting financial crime. Well, of course, you can ask people to do that by themselves, but and figure out how to do that. But of course, the EU has put forward a directive for that. We've known already anti-money laundering directive since 1991 from the EU, and where in 2018 the 5th anti-money laundering directive was approved. And that's actually the one that we're going to talk about mostly today. especially since it was only in 2020 that it was translated into national law, for example, in the Netherlands, but also throughout other nationalities within the EU. A bit of a complicating factor, but also interesting to explore, is the fact that in 2020 also the sixth Anti-Money Laundering Directive was approved by the EU, which of course will be implemented at the later stage. But of course it has parties that we're still working on the implementation on the fifth AMLD, are actually also looking into what the sixth might already bring. And hopefully we'll be able to shed some light on that together with our experts in the room today for all of you. So just a really brief overview of what the Anti-Money Laundering Directive has as new features, right? So what is new compared to AMLD5? There's a special attention for virtual asset services and wallet providers. Quite an important feat, of course, with cryptocurrencies becoming more popular. They explicitly wanted to bring them into the anti-money laundering perspective. Additional rules on prepaid card and e-money. The list of publicly exposed persons has been made official now. That needs to be checked as well. There's a special category for high-risk third countries. There's also a view for other stores of value, where also before, of course, money was mostly in space. There's actually more room now for other stores of value. Think about art, for example. And the UBO registry, the ultimate beneficial owner registry, becomes more important. So these are some of the highlights which I can tell you as a bit of a layman, because the experts will get to speak in just a minute. And here it is, the AMLD5 web guide. It's already live now on our website. You could already start looking at it. There's a couple of tiny details we'll still have to adapt, but we'll get that going along the way. But we're very happy that we've been able to collaborate with our partners here in this call to actually create this, because it's as you will go through it, you'll see that it's quite an enormous amount of work going through all the amendments and commenting on it, giving tips and tricks, but also looking at a little bit on how you could actually view the legislation that has been presented. Of course, we won't give you all the time to read it now today, because now we're going to hear from the law firms directly. And here, if they can already give you some smart tips and tricks and some ideas on where things might be heading directly to make life a bit easier for you, and perhaps find a proper way to know where to get started once you start reading the web guide. We're very happy to share this with our members and the larger network, because we believe it's a really important feature for the gatekeeping function of the financial industry, that everyone is aware of this and knows how to implement that properly. Well, before I actually hand over the microphone to the parties we've been collaborating with to do this, I really want to thank the law firms and the people from their teams that have been working on this, from CMS, Legaltree, Plume, Bureau Brandeis, Eversheds Settlements, Van Doorne and Stibbe. Because I think it's quite unique that we've been able to bring together outstanding law firms like this to basically pool the knowledge and collaborate on a project like this, which I think is hopefully you'll find a very valuable shared resource for anyone active in the financial industry. Of course, probably people with a legal background or compliance background will find this the most appealing, but we believe it's something that hopefully is accessible for more people to get a grip on what this new legislation has to offer, and actually not just has to offer, also is demanding from you. But without further ado, I'd really like to ask the first team to tell us a little bit about their view on the AMLD. So Simone and Casper, hopefully we'll be able to.
Yeah, thank you very much, Don.
There you are.
Casper Ruikers and my colleague Simone Peek at safe distance from Bureau Brandeis. We are financial litigators, as we like to call ourselves. We assist all kinds of financial institutions, companies, and also their directors when they have, well, troubles or requests, difficult requests from the regulators like the AFM, DNB, the Dutch Central Bank. Don has asked us to give our conclusion on AMLD5. And one sentence, it is, although the aim is to create more transparency, for example, by means of the UBO register, the result appears in this stage to be mainly more work for and risk of enforcement actions against entities. You see more transparency with regard to cryptocurrency. So there's an obligation to report any discrepancies you see as a obliged entity when you're identifying UBOs in your own right, and you double check the UBO register, and when there's a discrepancy, you have to report it back to the register. And if you don't do that, you get a fine. And if you don't do your own checks on the UBO, but you only rely on the UBO register, you also can get a fine or another measure from a regulator, which also brings us briefly to our lookout for AMLD5, which introduces more and stricter liability and responsibility for financial institutions and their directors, which is obviously also a theme in politics and in press. I think everybody can remember the big fine that ING got back in 2018 for non-compliance with their AML program. And also recently, by the end of last year, there was a decision made by the Bureau in Amsterdam to pursue criminal proceedings against Ralph Hamers, the former CEO of ING, for his role in that. So it's and compliance is always important, but given the liabilities that we see in the field that are developing also with AMLD5, we think that it's even more important today, not only for the big parties, but also for smaller companies. And Simone, I'm handing it to you to give some tips and tricks on how to do that.
Yeah, because we have little time, but it's really nice to be here. Thank you for the invitation, and thanks for joining all. Yeah, when it comes to our tips and tricks, there's a lot to say, but given the increased administration requirements, especially also with regard to the UBO register, what we always say, make sure you have some form of compliance framework in place for your organization, depending also on the organization you are, and to properly document sort of all your findings in your client due diligence. You will have to show to the regulator if they ask what you did and why. And even if sometimes opinions can differ, it's good to have at least your reasoning on paper. Also, it helps if you have your policies and procedures in order and your compliance system is more or less effective. This may be a mitigating circumstance, even if sometimes incident occurs that just happens now and then. It's if everything else is in order, that may be a reason for a regulator to be a bit more lenient on you. And then Don already said it, AML is a top priority of the governments in the EU. Make sure that when you receive an information request from a regulator or they start an investigation, sometimes it can even be a simple survey or market survey. Those can be sort of stepping stones towards a fuller investigation and enforcement measures. Make sure you know, or you have some process in place in your organization. Know if, are you the subject of the inquiry? Is that one of your clients, or that may make a respond. Make sure you know and ask about sort of the scope and the purpose and whether the regulator has a proper legal basis. Think about the content of your response, the consequences thereof, and of course you have to cooperate, but you also have certain rights not to cooperate if requests are disproportionate. Or if they may be used to impose a sanction. So that is two things to be aware of. Have that administration in place and be aware of information requests. Think first and then act.
Yeah, sounds like a solid advice. Thanks there, Simone and Casper. I think it's thanks for sharing your perspective, and also to keep it a bit concise, so we still have indeed something left for the other experts from expert lawyers we have at the table as well. So thanks for sharing, and looking forward to catch up with you furthermore in the Q&A session at the end.
Great, thanks.
So let's go to Lawrence from CMS.
Yes, thank you, Don, and Good afternoon all. By way of introduction, my name is Laurens Pronk. I'm a financial regulatory lawyer with law firm CMS. And I would like to briefly touch upon one of the key aspects of the fifth AML directive, and that is the introduction of the lower threshold to identify buyers of prepaid cards. Because one of the purposes of the fifth AML directive is to reduce the transactions from anonymous prepaid cards. For some time now, there has been some warnings against the use of these cards because of the anonymity of the users. Due to their nature, prepaid cards are well suitable for moving amounts of money, and therefore there is a risk that they are used for purposes of anti-money laundering and terrorism financing. And the scope of the AML legislation with regard to anonymous prepaid cards has been further tightened by the fifth AML directive, resulting in the fact that even more prepaid cards are now falling under the scope of the AML legislation. Well, all this is arranged in Section 1, Reference 7 of the 5th AML Directive, which is amending Section 12 of the 4th AML Directive. And in the Netherlands, this is all implemented in Section 7 of the Dutch AML Act. Well, what's the change? Following the 5th AML Directive, the threshold for identifying prepaid card holders is reduced from an amount of 250 euros to 150 euros. And basically, this means that if a prepaid card has a transaction limit of more than 115 euros per month, or has a value higher than 150 euros deposited on them, a customer due diligence is required by the issuer of the prepaid card. And under the 4th AML directive, this threshold was 250 euros, and for domestic transactions, 500 euros. So the threshold has been lowered. And for prepaid cards that make a repayment in cash possible, the threshold has been lowered from 100 euros to 50 euros. And this is, for example, the case if a user of a prepaid card returns goods that he has purchased with the prepaid cards, and then he gets cash in return. If the amount of the cash that he gets back is higher than 50 euros, a customer due diligence is required. Another thing I would like to remark is that pursuant to the 5th AML directive, member states do have the option to fully decline payments through anonymous prepaid cards. But it's good to know that the Netherlands has chosen not to make use of this so-called member state option. But the Dutch AML Act now states that financial institutions are obliged to reject anonymous prepaid cards issued from third countries, so non-EU or EEA countries, if these cards do not meet the requirements as included in the 5th AML directive. My lookout to AMLA6, well, basically, I think that from a legal point of view, no really significant changes are to be expected, but eye-catching is that the 6th AML directive contains a list of 22 different activities that should be considered as predicate criminal offenses. And this is to harmonize the definition of predicate offenses through to all the member states. And financial institutions are obliged to check whether the services they provide, well, maybe facilitate criminal offenses. And if so, they are obliged to take appropriate measures to oppose, such by, for example, ending banking agreements or, well, having the agreements with their clients. And I think that it's interesting seeing the recent case law in the Netherlands is showing that even the AML Act is saying that a relationship has to be ended. Also, in that case, it must not be disproportional. And I think it's interesting for financial institutions to find the balance between the customer interest they have to take into account, and also, on the other hand, applying to the AML legislation. So I think that's something to be aware of.
I think that's a good point, Laurens. I think this is, I've definitely heard already about some cases where you could talk about financial exclusion, which might indeed go further than the intention of law here.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, So definitely let's also talk about that in the discussion at the end, because I think that's definitely one of the topics that's a lot on people's mind. Is it okay if I move to the next one, Laurens?
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Laurens, for sharing your insights. Very valuable. Then we go to Thomas.
Yes, thanks, Don, and hi everyone. Thanks for joining in today. I'm speaking here today on behalf of Van Doorn. I'm a tax lawyer there, but our input was also provided by my colleague Rutger Tedam, who couldn't join us today. He's part of our criminal defense internal investigations team, and also assisted cases in financial fraud and has knowledge in that respect. Well, the AML5 is interesting in our view, as it's not really providing any major new items, but it's really building on what has done before and where we are going next. One example in the Netherlands is the Dutch Euro register. It has, of course, been introduced by the 4th AML directive. The Netherlands was quite slow in implementing that directive, has had several reminders from the European Commission and urges to implement it sooner. Eventually, we have done that, and perhaps some of the attendees listening today have already registered their ultimate beneficial owners with the Dutch Chamber of Commerce. Unless, if they are lucky, they are listed entities, then this is one of the few items that is less stringent for listed entities. But they have, of course, some other highly demanding regulatory requirements elsewhere. The 5th AML directive added the Euro register in that respect, that we should not also include trusts and other legal arrangements in that register. It's not really a big change for the Netherlands, because Dutch civil law does not know the concept of a trust. We do have some mutual funds that may be coming to scope that do need to register as a result of this new register. But mostly those trusts that are added in the AML5 will not be included, will not be relevant for Dutch clients. I think the most interesting part here is the legislation surrounding cryptocurrencies. If you have been reading the newspapers or if you've been checking your investment portfolio, you may have seen that cryptocurrencies have become more valuable again. We see large players such as Tesla or MicroStrategy in the US adding Bitcoin to their balance sheet, as they have decreasing faith in the US dollar or fiat cash as a stable currency, and want to have a hedge against that by adding Bitcoin to their balance sheet. Well, the European Commission, also the Financial Action Task Force, see that these cryptocurrencies and crypto assets, the more broader term, pose a regulatory threat, and see that the existing regulation is not sufficient to cover types of anti-money laundering or even regular legal oversight on those. So AML5 has a tiny idea to see whether virtual wallet holders can be registered as of next year in a central database, which would be a huge step forward for compliance and transparency in the EU, but would also be an enormous setback for anyone thriving on less transparent virtual currencies. We see discussions in the EU, not on the AML directive, but another EU directive called the Directive on Administrative Cooperation, that virtual wallet holders, crypto assets, will also be coming to scope of another obligation called the Common Reporting Standard, meaning that just like banks and insurance companies, these entities should report information on their clients, for example, wallet holders on cryptocurrency exchanges or anyone else holding custody of crypto assets, may be eligible to report those to local tax authorities or other local oversight regulators. This is truly something that is coming, and I think our key takeaways from AML and AML6 that if you are operating in the virtual currency or crypto asset space, you should brace yourself and start working yesterday on a control framework that you are compliant, because as the crypto asset space will increase, the regulators will be knocking on the door even more.
Yeah, no, I think you're fully right there. It's definitely, we can see that coming already, and I think that's only going to increase. But let's talk a bit about the implications of that in the discussion at the end, if that's okay, Thomas?
Sure.
Yeah, great. Thanks, and thanks for your contribution. Really valuable insights there as well. So I'd like to move to Danielle from Eversheds.
Don, and hi everyone. I'm Danielle van der Vijver, and I'm a member of the Financial Services and Regulatory team with Eversheds Sutherland in the Netherlands. And I assist financial institutions with various queries concerning compliance with financial law, of which AML is of course a very big part. Well, I believe that AML5 was taken as an opportunity to supervise parties involved in crypto assets, with our Dutch central bank of course playing a leading role. Of course, crypto assets now need to register with the supervisor when providing services. And recently we did a comparison with other jurisdictions, and the Dutch procedure to register is by far the most complex procedure compared to other jurisdictions such as Germany and France. For example, our registration more looks like a license, whereas it's only a registration. So that's sometimes quite hard to explain to other jurisdictions. What we believe is a lookout to AML6 is it's actually another attempt to create a level playing field, removing loopholes in domestic legislation of member states. But I'm very glad that the differences between the jurisdictions are acknowledged, as there even was a difference in how to interpret money laundering. So another thing that would help greatly is if the supervisors will supervise the practical implementation more closely, as in practice there seems to be a big difference in the various jurisdictions, how regulators check if parties are compliant, and if not, how the regulators enforce. And of course, our regulator is quite strict when it comes to AML, so it's a very positive thing that AML6 is aiming to align this a little bit more. Well, we think it's very important to be in time and anticipate on AML6, conduct a self-assessment, and see what you need to do to comply with the next AML directive. Well, we noticed that parties tend to adjust their procedures and system fairly late. And we have done quite a few reviews of CDD processes and AML audits, and adjustment to new legislation is often done under great stress. But as soon as new legislation is coming, the company should do a self-assessment as soon as possible in order to comply correctly, as it's quite a lot you have to comply with, so that's very important. And we also think it's very important to also monitor your technology deployment. This is actually in line with my previous comment. If you start too late with amending your procedures and systems, this will also mean that you need some time to actually amend your technology deployment. And if you change your policy on time, so you also have to amend the corresponding technology in the same time. And what we see is that institutions tend to have a good AML policy on paper, but then in practice, not everything goes according to the policy. For example, some of the AML people that are working on the floor are considering every client as a high-risk client, although that's not always necessary, and it costs a lot of time for a company. So it's very good to have a good policy on paper, but to also monitor how it works in practice in order to comply with the relevant legislation. Thank you.
Indeed. I think indeed that, let's say, at least I see that quite often also companies hide sort of behind their technology roadmap before they can say, we can only be compliant after the IT department has developed XYZ. But indeed, I think also it's going to be less and less accepted by regulators as well, that's put in the way. Thanks, Danielle, for sharing your insights here. And indeed, I will again have some more topics on the discussion later on. For example, the overcompliance, which I think is also a big issue within the financial industry. Very hard to really assess well, where does the border lie and how do we cope with, let's say, potential gray area, if there is one. So thank you for sharing, Bastiaan from LegalTree.
Yes, thank you, Don, and thank you for having the opportunity to participate. This was something we were gladly doing, and seeing the result. We are very much hoping that the industry can work with this and benefit from it. And in that respect, I think my first comment would be that I very much understand and have sympathy for all the issues the industry is facing with getting compliant and remaining compliant with all the AMLD regulations. As a lawyer, we are subject to the same rules and regulations. So from that perspective, I fully know where everybody is coming from, and be trusted that we from time to time face the same issues when having to identify clients and things alike. Having said that, I won't go much into our specific contribution to this project. This can all be found on the website, and there are some particular tips and tricks involved, but not too many. As to the AMLD5 and 6, there has a lot been said already. I think that there's not really much to contribute, and my headings here are very short and should generally cover our views in that respect. Maybe to finish off with 2 tips and tricks for the industry, which are not particularly related to the particular parts of this directive we contributed to. I would say, and that's, I think, also what Danielle was after just now, is that also based on our experience when advising and assisting clients on beforehand or afterwards when having discussions with the regulator, it is very much important that you remain up to speed and try to remain compliant from a policy and procedures perspective. From time to time, we see clients having issues with keeping their policies up to date, which is, if you enter into a discussion with a regulator, a 3-0 behind score, you may say. So indeed, with the upcoming new rules, please take a moment to see whether there's anything to be amended. And relating to this particular AMLD5 amendment, in that respect, also bear in mind the national risk assessments that have become available under the new rules, and also under AMLD5 will be further enhanced, and take them into account when preparing your own risk profile, and on the basis thereof preparing your risk policy. And that's, for the moment, I think, what I wanted to contribute. But maybe later in the discussion we can touch upon particular issues.
Yeah, thanks, Bastiaan. Thanks for sharing. And indeed, I also have some ideas, some topics for you, because I think especially what you're saying here, on the lookout for AMLD6, on, let's say, maybe the broader perspective of criminal conduct through the financial industry, and sort of the increased scope perhaps on the gatekeeper function is perhaps something we could discuss as well. If you talk about, maybe we even go beyond money laundering, but think about trafficking or other or fraud prevention. So curious to have a discussion about that, for example. And thank you for sharing for now. Then we have, last but not least, Matthijs from Ploem. Oh no, sorry, not last out, by the way. We still have Stibbe to go as well.
I just wanted to say,
yeah.
well, thanks, Don, and thanks also for the opportunity. My name is Matthijs Bolkestein. I'm a banking and finance partner at Ploem. And part of my practice is more and more focused on issues around AML requirements, not only for financial institutions, but more and more also for parties outside the financial sector. That more and more also fall under the reach of the regulations. My takeaway from AMLD5 can best be captured in a question, and that question would be: more is yet to come, or enough is enough? And to be honest, I actually find both. On the one hand, I expect that there's more to come, although AMLD5 provides, in my view, for useful and further detailed guidance on, for instance, electronic identification, enhanced client due diligence, but also on the exchange of information between various regulators. I see in daily practice that there are still a lot of questions that are, well, the answers on those questions are not quite clear when it comes to interpretations of definitions, but also on, and especially on, the UBO register and identifying the UBO. So I expect that besides AMLD6, there will be an AMLD7 or 8 to give further guidance and clarity on those topics. On the other hand, I think enough is enough. If you look at the avalanche of new laws and regulations that have been introduced and will be introduced affecting fintech organizations, and even if we just focus on AML regulations, the impact both on time and cost is immense, which requires a lot of resource, not just from a capital perspective, but also from a people perspective. And in my view, fintech should spend time and invest money more in the development and marketing than in this strict compliance requirements. So in my personal view, there might be a more balanced approach, whereby I also think that the government should play an important role when it comes to facilitating tools such as access to databases, but also to improve alignment, for instance, with GDPR rules and obligations, because we see that a lot of clients are struggling with that. I also think that we should look more on the downside of all these regulations. If you look, for instance, at opening a bank account, it's becoming extremely difficult, and I think part of that is caused by banks having to obey with AML regulations. In my view, that's not effective. So that's why I think it also is enough for now. Looking forward to AMLD6, it provides for more tools to fight and combat against money laundering and terrorist financing, also on an international level. And if you take into account the attention already given to this topic, not just in the financial sector, I expect that we will see an increase of AML-related prosecution and proceedings in the coming year. I try to include 2 tips from daily practice. I think one is already sufficiently mentioned, and that's the proper administration and record keeping. I can easily replace it by another topic we often come across in working with clients, and that is outsourcing of certain AML tasks. Still, we see a lot of clients that think that as soon as they outsource certain tasks to a third party, that it's out of their hands and out of their responsibility. And I think that's an important mistake. Ultimately, you will always remain responsible, and therefore it's really important that in all the agreements you enter into in relation to an outsourcing arrangement, make sure that you have sufficient rights and tools to keep proper oversight. Another point that we come across in practice is increasingly more attention from auditors if it comes to payments and the counterparty of that payment. We have been advising a number of clients last year on instruction of their auditors to advise on why certain payments were made by another party than should have been made. So my advice would be to build in some kind of monitoring system within your financial department to make sure that the counterpart of the payment is indeed the counterpart that you expect it to be. And if that's not the case, then proactively verify why another party is paying, because that could save you a lot of time and money on the auditing side. That was it for now, Don. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Matthijs. I think the latter indeed, I can imagine, is also quite important actually to protect your customers from internal fraud, for example, as suddenly new accounts appear in the payment schemes. So it's definitely a valuable one as well. Thanks for sharing. Then indeed, the last but not least, Roderick Vrolijk from Stibbe.
Yeah, thank you, Don. Hi, thank you. I'm Roderick Vrolijk. I'm a senior associate in Stibbe's financial regulation team, and we work in multidisciplinary teams, and we advise financial institutions and also non-financial institutions on the impact of these AML regulations, because I've heard many people speaking about crypto services providers and financial institutions in this call, but I think it's quite important to also realize that these rules and regulations are impactful for a group of companies that goes well beyond the traditional financial sector, anti-fintech sector, but also impacts companies that are kind of on the fringes of these sectors. Companies that are, for instance, active in innovative sectors, or companies that are like HEMA or Wekamp, not financial companies in the traditional sense, but that happen to offer services that are financial services and that come in scope of these services for that reason. If you look at AMLD5 and also at 6, I think that it's sometimes unfair to call them AMLD5 and AMLD6, because they are kind of add-ons to the framework of AMLD4, and they're basically further elaborating the framework that was already started under the AMLD4 framework. And if you look at it, it shows that these regulations are very quickly developing, and that the regulator is not awaiting that, but is actually taking steps to keep up to speed with parties in the fintech space, and also other parties that are trying to work their way into the financial sector, and that pose threats or risks from an anti-money laundering perspective. So altogether, it's quite an impressive legal framework the EU is rolling out, but it's also very impactful. And I think that if you look at AMLD5, and I think that's something I also recognize in what the author said before me, that's I think kind of the downside of being the last one to speak. Agree more that it's a very impactful framework in the AMLD5. We're still kind of trying to understand what it means from a operational perspective to comply with all these rules. And whilst we're doing that, AMLD6 is being rolled out at the same time. And I think that it's sometimes forgotten by regulators and legislators what that means for market parties. Personally, and I think I'm also speaking for the rest of our team, we are kind of looking forward to the plans of the European Commission to work on a single EU rulebook. That's a mechanism we've seen in many other fields of EU financial regulation. I think that would be very much welcomed by lawyers, but also by the sector, because although AMLD4, 5, and 6 harmonized AML regulations to a large extent throughout the EU, it's still not fully harmonized, and there's still local regulations, local legislators, and that poses a very huge pressure on parties that are active in more than one jurisdiction. So I think working towards a truly integrated EU financial regulatory framework for anti-money laundering with one kind of ESMA or EBA EU style regulatory body would be very much welcomed. I think that's something we are looking forward to. And if you then look at 2 tips and tricks, what can financial institutions do? We realize that it's very impactful. We advise all these parties on a daily basis, but I think it's also time for these entities to make very clear to the regulator what this actually means after 4 to 6 years of preparing and implementing all these regulations and all the focus that goes into that. I think it's important to explain to regulators what that means on a daily basis, what it means on an operational basis, and also what someone said already before, that means that it puts pressure on being innovative, it puts pressure on serving clients in the right manner. So explaining that and conveying that message to the regulator is quite important. As a second trick, tips and trick, I think that we're at the point now that you can no longer be a good advisor if you only look from a financial regulatory or financial regulatory and criminal law angle. But we're also at a point where data privacy and other legal expertises are needed. So I think if you are working on this as a financial institution or a fintech, or if you're working on this as a lawyer, you need to make sure that you not only look from your silo approach, only from a regulatory perspective, but also realize that there are, for instance, GDPR aspects that you need to take into account, that you also need to make sure that you comply from that perspective, because it's good to prevent fines from DNB or the AFM, but it's even better to also make sure that other regulators like the data regulator, the AP, don't step in because they've got concerns from their perspective in relation to the way you remain compliant with AML regulations.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks, Roderick. I think it's a really clear point that you're making, and I definitely see that in our conversation with the regulators as well as with market participants, that there's quite some struggle to meet all the requirements from all the different angles, and which are sometimes just plainly contradicting each other. And I think this is also indeed. I think it will benefit society once we are able to sort that out and give a clearer guidance on actually the interplay of these different requirements. Thanks for sharing. So now we'll actually move to the Q&A. So everyone who's listening in, please type your questions in the chat if you have any that you would like to ask our great experts here at the table. Alexander was already so kind to ask some questions, so I think let's start with those. One was for Laurens. Whether you think the e-money measure is effective in the end? Could you perhaps elaborate on that, Laurens?
Yes, thank you for the question, Alexander. Well, do I consider it effective? Well, under the 4th AML directive, it's obviously was not really, because the reports have shown that prepaid cards were frequently used for the purpose of money laundering and terrorist financing. But like I stated, under the 4th AML directive, it was allowed that a prepaid card had a total value of 500 euros at a maximum, and the issuer was not allowed to perform a customer due diligence, and now that is significantly reduced to 150 euros. So I think at least that contributes to the effectiveness of this measure. And another thing I think is, well, which party will actually conduct the customer due diligence. I think it was Matthijs who also referred to that a lot of parties make use of outsourcing in this respect. And in this case, it's logic that the issuer of the prepaid card outsources the customer due diligence requirements to, for example, the shop or the e-shop who is actually selling the prepaid card. But, well, then the issuer is not allowed to pull his hands off of this obligation. And the risk is that that parties are looking to each other, or that the issuer is not really monitoring whether the shop is actually conducting the obligations pursuant to this legislation. So I think that outsourcing, however it should contribute, it will not always do that, in fact. So yeah.
Thanks, Laurens. I think that's a clear one. And the relationship, I think, to the outsourcing, I think, is also relevant, because that's definitely one of the challenges I think that a lot of parties are looking into, because increasingly services are being outsourced. And that's also, I think, why we see, for example, things like DORA pop up, right? So that indeed the value chain is becoming more complex. So also the EU is stepping up with new regulations and requirements for actually how to do outsourcing and how responsibility throughout the value chain is evolving. Alexander also had another question for Danielle to elaborate a bit on the tech deployment part. Could you perhaps say a bit more about that, Danielle?
Yeah, like Don already said, of course, if you want to comply with AML, you write a policy on paper, but you still have to implement that in your procedures, which most likely are involving systems and well, because you don't always have a lot of time. Yeah, you should start a little bit early, because before it's implemented in your technical systems. So, so to say, oh, I'm sorry.
No, I can imagine what you mean. But you say indeed, because there's such a time lag potentially between the intention and the implementation in your processes, that you actually might run out of time to be ready,
yes,
to be compliant.
Yes,
when to, yeah. Do you see have you seen any smart moves on how people do that? Is it just basically getting started early?
Yeah, I think that's the most important part, because we also see that, for example, with the SFDR, while it's still a little bit unclear how you need to comply with it, you tend to start a little late, and then once it comes, yeah, when you really need to comply, yeah, you're probably too late. Because you need more time to implement it on time. So that's a real struggle we see in practice.
Yeah, no, exactly. I can imagine. But indeed, it's good for everyone to be prepared on time. And I think also what was mentioned here was the self-assessment that parties should do, right?
Yes.
So that's also a really important one. So how do you go? So what would be a practical way to actually do that self-assessment?
Well, I think you need to reassess all your policies. For example, with a law firm, for example, to assist you a little bit, especially with regard to the new regulations that apply to you.
Okay. Yeah. No, I can. Yeah, and so I think that's also probably that. I think all your firms are from time to time also being asked to assist with when new regulations arises, to actually step in and figure out what potentially it could mean for operational processes and legal frameworks inside. Thanks. I just want to start with a question for you, Casper and or Simone. It's hard to find you on one screen, so I'll approach you as one. So with regard to basically crypto regulations that you spoke about also at the beginning, is where do you believe it's actually hampering innovation at the moment? Do you think it's actually, because sometimes it feels like it's a really big limitation to what's possible at the moment? Do you feel that that's going to maybe even be sharpened? Because we also see, for example, MiCA coming up, right? New regulations for crypto assets. Do you feel that we're actually becoming more specific on how to actually cope with crypto? And is AMLD5 actually sort of was that the big hammer to basically first get everyone back into the cage? And are we now going to look more nuanced at it, or where do you think we stand?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Indeed, a relevant point. And I think, yeah, of course, on cryptocurrency, we're sort of it's a moving vehicle, so to say. I think from a risk perspective, AML was one of the sort of the first items that also governments, regulators wanted the cryptocurrency to be a part of. And I think now the regulators, and there have been some discussions lately also in the press that DNB, AFM are, and especially DNB, are also sort of broadening their reach and trying to bring crypto assets under their regulations. And that's also where MiCA is coming in order to do that. So I think that scope and regulation will broaden to bring sort of the cryptocurrency providers under that same regulation or similar regulation. And I think it's also, regulators are also learning and on the go, so to say. I think in the very beginning, 2-3 years ago, they were still very much struggling, but also educating on the new field, and I think they're getting up to speed and really are keen to be also in discussion with providers there, and hopefully that will also help innovation and allow parties to operate.
And to add to that, Simone. Of course, regulation and also, as Matthijs mentioned, there's a lot of regulation for financial institutions at the moment, which can be hampering. But specifically for cryptocurrencies, if you look back 4 or 5 years, it was something for tech nerds, so to say. But now it's becoming more and more mainstream. And I think that regulation of cryptocurrency platforms and e-wallets and is only contributing to the fact that they're becoming more mainstream and more acceptable. And the idea that Elon Musk, for example, invested $1.5 billion in Bitcoin, you could not have imagined that 3 years ago. But now nobody's, really surprised by it, and it's only good for Bitcoin with the course going up. Yeah. So as for cryptocurrencies, I think it's actually a good thing that they're becoming some sort of that there's getting some sort of regulation from DNB and AFM and the other European regulators at this stage.
Yeah.
But
yeah. No, I can imagine. Thomas, I think you have a comment on that, maybe from a tax perspective.
Yeah, well, from a tax perspective and a general perspective, I think I can agree that I think generally it's a good road that the regulators are taking, that more clarity is giving in regulation. It will first, of course, be seen as a struggle, as a additional hurdle that may limit innovation. But I think parties from the crypto business should also see it as a tiny bit of a reality check, that this is also the business in which they operate. There are more rules as they grow bigger. They may even see it as a complement, that as they are growing in size, that they're being subject to more scrutiny from regulators. I mentioned before that if you are a listed entity, a unicorn business, you made it. But as a gift, you also get increased regulatory rules and oversight that you need to comply with. Your administrative expenses go sky high, just as hopefully your listing your listed shares. So parties should meet each other in the middle. I think they should enter into the discussion with the regulators, and together they can form a practical form of rules that both provide the transparency that the EU, the US, the FATF would like to see, and also be manageable from a business perspective, of course. You see that a famous cryptocurrency exchange called Binance has hired a former ambassador of China to deal with this compliance affairs in the US. I think they also hired 2 former FATF members to explain internally the scope of the and the far-reaching arm of the FATF within the EU and the US and the Asian continent. So you see that it's being embraced, but it's also it will also take time, effort, and money to get to a workable solution. And I think that is what we are. What will be the bottom line of today, that you want to be in control of a framework and not be lost for words when the regulators come knocking on your door.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah, and to add to that, because I heard you mention Binance, Thomas, which is funny enough, I received an invite from Binance to attend a webinar on how I can report my cryptocurrencies to the tax authorities in the Netherlands. So you see that also these types of platforms are taking their responsibility in compliance of law, not only.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and the tax perspective
Nice.
in the Netherlands, just to touch a little bit, it's for consumers, it's relatively easy compared to other countries. We see it as investment income. Even if you're the best trader in the world, it will most likely just be investment income as your cash sitting on the bank. But it's likely that may also change as the gains that people make and the exposure that businesses have and the valuation issues that they may face, that will increase as well. But I'll be looking forward to hearing more on that from you as well.
Yeah. Maybe to wrap this part up, there was a question to Simone on whether crypto registration with EMD license, I think that would be electronic money, I would expect, whether the DNB would welcome that as it would mean more KYC possibilities.
Yeah, I think that by my recollection, the current view is that cryptos are not really qualified as electronic money. But I think it's an interesting idea to see if you could bring it under that type of license. But what is your idea, Simone?
I'm not sure yet. I think Mika will definitely help. I'm not sure what the current view is, to be very honest. But I think, as I mentioned, DNB will definitely want to or have a say about sort of the market, and they will, I think look for a way to get these providers and new companies into their sort of area of regulation. So, but to what extent and how they will actually do it and under which license they will bring it, I'm not sure. Perhaps anyone else in the group has heard any news on that, but.
No, I think the only thing is I think that Mika is trying to just focus on the not already regulated services. So basically, if you would do services under electronic money license, even though it would be registered on some kind of crypto database, it shouldn't matter under Mika, basically.
True. Yeah, but I think what Mika also does is have some parts were already regulated, and what Mika says is that all the parts that were not regulated already, we want to sort of bring into the regulated area. So I think in the end, the idea is that everything that's sort of
no escape
related will be regulated, and then under which regime will have to be, and maybe there will be, some new licenses there. But yeah.
Thanks. So I think Dick raised a topic, which is, I think, a lot about the way basically financial institutions have to deal with customers. So whether they are actually allowing, let's say, allowing for more room to allow people to actually have a bank account. Bastiaan, is it perhaps something that you would like to answer to check in? So how do you see the over-compliance within financial institutions, and perhaps to balance out, actually parties not getting a bank account these days? And can we make that simpler?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And there are at least two things I take from this question. First of all, the view that this may become too much. I think that's what Matthijs also pointed at, which I incidentally fully agree, but that's another thing. And the second thing is indeed on whether there is evasive action possible from a potential client perspective. As indicated, if you won't meet the criteria of the one institution, that you simply go to the next. And there, at least at present, still seems to be room. At least I know of examples where different standards are set by different institutions, leaving the option open that you will meet the one but will not meet the other, and therefore have a certain possibility to well, not at your own option, but to shop if you are refused by the one, and to go to the next one. What would be a more effective approach or a solution to this is another thing, and that's a really interesting one, which I find difficult to answer in a couple of remarks.
So, I think one of the things that was mentioned was the central database and more sort of the government approach, right? So basically making the tools available from a central approach to actually be able to comply with the regulations at hand and make the whole information process much simpler. Matthijs, do you have any additions, perhaps?
Yeah, but what I understand, but I haven't seen it yet, is that at least the Dutch banks are more and more cooperating on a joint system in which they include input on clients and customers that they refused, or where there is some gray area. The latest I heard about that is that there is a lot of discussion about the GDPR aspects of that system. That's why I said before that I think that from a government perspective there should be there is work to done to make sure that that's better aligned with so GDPR is better aligned with AMLD regulation. I know, for instance, also in the trust sector where the rumor goes for years that if the larger trust companies in the Netherlands are getting more and more sophisticated on their AML checks and are more and more refusing new clients and getting rid of smaller clients, and they then move to the smaller trust firms. I understand that there's a similar register introduced now to make that more difficult for parties to just hop from one to another. So I think there are some initiatives, but there are also some regulatory hurdles that need to be taken before I think the effectiveness is really there.
Well,
Okay.
to add on that, in another area, financial institutions can make use of a so-called external referral system that provides for that a financial institution gets a hit when, for example, a person is applying for an insurance, but the financial institution, the insurer, is aware of that he was not honest about his claims history or his insurance history. Then that person will be included in the EVR, and when the person tries it at another insurer, that insurer will get a hit. So maybe in this area, some they can look to the EVR to get some input from that. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great. I think if we would actually be able to rely on such services much more, would I think be really helpful. But I think still I'm really curious also whether you feel that's parties are actually able to rely on that, or whether they would actually still have to reinvestigate by themselves to have their own source of data, as you still see a lot happening these days.
Yeah, and I know there are a lot of data privacy issues as well there.
Yeah. It might tie into your also the question by Rutger on the reliance on third parties. Matthijs, I think you addressed that issue in the first place as well, sort of how you can rely on your suppliers, third parties in this context.
Yeah. And I saw the question, and where I refer to is that if a institution outsources certain AML tasks, so when you instruct or engage with a third-party service provider, what we see in practice is that the agreements used are often not, well, sufficiently dealing with the rights and entitlements you have to monitor the whole process, to be provided with the relevant data, and to basically have the complete oversight and mandatory tools to take it over when necessary. Roderick already referred also to the GDPR aspects of this, and I think outsourcing is one of the perhaps most dangerous areas if it comes to GDPR, because we see a lot of outsource agreements that are not compliant with GDPR rules, and we still see a lot of parties easily transferring personal data to other parties without any compliance framework underneath, and without proper contracts. So I think that was what I wanted to address when I mentioned the outsourcing aspect.
Yeah. Anything to add there, Roderick? You also mentioned that.
And I think that outsourcings are generally a bit of a forgotten thing, even though they're like the regulators keep on pointing and addressing this issue. I think financial institutions take that at heart, and we in our practice still see a lot of agreements that need to be improved, and there's quite clear guidance and quite clear laws on what should be included in an outsourcing agreement from various angles. And I think that if I were a legal counsel in a financial institution, that would be very high priority, because it's an easy thing to do right.
And in that sense, that may also be an opportunity for a lot of the sort of the tech startups and fintech companies on this event also. There are a lot of interesting software tools already that can actually help you getting through these checks more easily. And yeah, I can definitely see that as also an opportunity, given the fact that some aspects of the checks you may outsource, or you may use tools, that this is something, gearing up and an increasing business opportunity there for a lot of techs.
Yeah, no, so I agree. Indeed, I think it's definitely a business opportunity with some solutions that are could be launched into the market. At the same time, it's also a risk, because you see that also basically managing the risk throughout the value chain is something that's quite complex, and a lot of parties are a bit wary to actually work within complex value chains because of that. You want to add something there as well, Roderick?
Yeah, I think that it's quite difficult to keep in control if you too easily use those tools. I think it's very important to first understand what AML means if you have your license, because you can only monitor and control your outsourced relationship if you've got a good insight on what it actually means to perform those services. I think it's great that there are service providers, and I think there are a few on this call as well, that can perform AML services for licensed companies. But I think having a thorough understanding in your own company is, I think, the first step to making sure that it all remains compliant and that you don't get a regulator knocking on your door that says that you've not done it right. So before you outsource, understand what you're doing and make sure that you've got the right monitoring and control.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. Let's say one topic I also want to address, because I think that's really relevant as well for the listeners, is I think the potential of personal liability. I think as we've seen now that with the prosecution of Ralph Hamers, and I think it was also mentioned in the foresight of AMLD5, that we actually might see more focus not just on the company, but for settlements, but actually going after the people that govern the organization and the business. How do you see that evolve from here? Because I think that's quite something that could be, basically quite scary from a manager in any financial institution.
Yeah, happy to say something about this. Is that
Sure.
if you? I think it's definitely a call from sort of society, politics, a call for more accountability of senior managers in all areas. So not just AML, but definitely also AML. And we see in our practice, we see the regulators stepping up, and not just that. When there's an AML compliance issue at a financial institution, DNB, AFM, yes, they are keen on finding the company, but they are more and more looking at the directors as well, senior managers, for their role in sort of in the non-compliance issue, and that may impact sort of further. It's not just a fine for a senior manager, but it impacts their career as well, because it has an impact on sort of if you want to take another position at another financial institution, you need to be reassessed again on sort of the fit and proper test. You have already sort of a cross behind your name, and it's not definitely a no-go, but it definitely impacts sort of the further discussions on this. So we will see more, and with especially Ralph Hamers is a big topic. We see that now with ABN AMRO, where also the directors and senior managers are mentioned. We will see that both from a regulator perspective as well as a criminal prosecution perspective. That's at least our view from what we see right now.
Yeah. Any additions to that for anyone? I think in any case, what I think is also striking here is that the public opinion also increasingly plays a role in what is deemed to be decent and not. From that perspective, I think that's also something relative. What's maybe not completely new, but I think it's now becoming quite explicit around this topic in any case.
Yeah, and especially also with the re-decision on the prosecution of Mr. Hamers of ING. Also, the court sort of literally said because public opinion was one of the reasons why they took this decision. You're very right.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah, and just sorry. No, go ahead.
Thomas, go ahead. You start.
Yes. I just want to add that it fits into the bigger picture of what we see in tax transparency as well. Mentioned earlier the EU Directive on Administrative Cooperation. It's one of the most popular favorite directives of the European Commission, in which they try to increase their influence in local member states. Regulations with respect to tax. Last year we have implemented DAX 6, which means that tax advisors and other intermediaries need to disclose tax structures that they advise upfront before they are implemented, or at least per the moment that they are implemented. And that is the result of Panama Papers, Paradise Papers, and the discussion that people need to and businesses need to pay their fair share, and that also boils down to the accountability that we see in tax, but now also in innovative financial products and regulatory overview in general. That if you are in business these days, and whether it's a traditional business or an innovative business, you need to feel comfortable and in control that if you open the doors for the tax authorities or the Dutch Central Bank or another the financial investigative unit, you name it, they can walk in and you can show them everything you got, and you can answer every question they have. And that is, it's a bit of a struggle to prepare that, but I think as a business owner, as someone responsible for the internal compliance, that is something that you should strive for, because it makes you sleep easier at night, and you are also more flexible to build your business around it, because the solid base is there.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Matthijs. You want to add to that?
Yeah, I actually wanted to add to what Simone said, is that I'm afraid that the proceedings in relation to Ralph Hamers, that probably will end in just being a showcase. But looking forward to AMLD5, that really provides new tools that should be incorporated in the Dutch criminal code that allow the public prosecutor to more effectively go against natural persons. So that will definitely, in my view, definitely lead to a very detailed review of all the risk policies in financial institutions, because the chance of being actually convicted as a board member will be increasingly higher than it is now.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a serious one to consider. So I think that's also being used as a stick to actually get people to implement faster and be more thorough in complying with the rules. But hopefully it's still done in a collaborative way to actually get, the public side and the private side collaborating on actually trying to tackle the issue. We've got one question, or maybe it's even a challenge by Ashley, who posted it, about how to actually, with the increased number of cases that you might well have to report, how to make sure you don't completely explode with regards to the number of false positives or false negatives. I'm not sure if we're moving too far into data science here, but should any of you have any ideas for Ashley, please share. Not an idea at the moment? Then Ashley, let's talk about that offline at some point. You know where to find me. Then let's see if we can sort this out. I think it's indeed probably more into the data science perspective. We got one question in from Robert. Let's take that as the last one to be able to wrap up in time. Let's see. So do you have any more insights on whether we are able to better chase the real criminals? So indeed, we see that the regulations are really good at finding the financial institutions, but are we actually getting better at capturing the criminals and stopping criminality and getting the people behind bars where needed? Any thoughts on that from any of you?
Maybe it also relates a little bit to what I said before, over compliance. So if like I said, what we see on the floor is that a lot of AML analysts take a lot of time for the clients that are not high risk, and if that takes too much time, you will not have enough time to also look into your other clients that do have a high risk. So I think it's very important for the people working on the floor that they know what to look for and also know when it's enough. So know when you can stop, so you can spend the other time on the clients that are high risk.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, also on the other side, I think from the executive bodies that need to go through all the data that is thrown at them, the financial investigative units, the well, the tax authorities, from my perspective, and well, everyone that is has to look into that data. There's a lot to report, but I'm not sure whether there's the manpower or the efficient internal systems to review all the data there is. I think that is a real challenge. Also, you see that there are also a lot of manpower being cut across the various member states for smaller governments, and it's really government bodies that need to address the data that is gathered and provided by the businesses that are subject to these new regulations. That's a real challenge.
No, sure. Thanks, Thomas. Bastiaan, any thoughts from your end on this?
Well, my maybe concluding comment in this respect would be is that we have this kind of regulation because the government simply can't cope itself. So it needs the industry to do the work because there's not enough police, public prosecutors, and what have you to do the legwork the industry is now doing. So in that respect, this is not really about getting the true criminals, but only about helping the government doing something they cannot do themselves. And whether that is good or not is a political question. I have my views on that, but I fear that looking at number 6 now and what Matthijs said, that there will no doubt be a 7, 8 and what have you. We are looking to increase rules and compliance simply because of the fact that the end result these rules are after, namely getting the true criminals behind bars, is still not being met for various reasons.
Yeah, no, it's definitely that's a tough one, and I agree. I think it is some kind of a weird form of outsourcing by the government of this task indeed. But that's also why I hope indeed that it will become some kind of a more friendlier supplier-buyer relationship in the future, because basically giving direction on what you want to have done through fines is not the best way to get this done, I think.
No, I think it's important work that the Holland FinTech is doing here with informing the relevant audience, where the government is not always doing their best job. I think this event was a first step in informing the audience, and hopefully, and undoubtedly, it's not the last step, as Thijs and Bastiaan just mentioned. I think next year we'll be discussing probably AMLD5, AMLD 10 or 10.5.
No, indeed. So thanks. I'd like to wrap it up because I think it would be good to make sure we don't run too late. Although we can probably we've picked up on some topics that could last for hours, but let's pick them up sometime soon when we could actually have a drink with that and extend the conversation a bit. For now, Matthijs, Danielle, Laurens, Thomas, Bastiaan, Roderick, and Simone and Casper, thank you very much for joining us today on behalf of your firms CMS, Legaltree, Ploem, Stibbe, Van Doorne, Eversheds Sutherlands, and Bureau Brandeis. I think it's really wonderful what we've been able to establish together. I think it's a really wonderful resource, and I hope that we are able to continue our discussion of today with our network over the coming period. Hopefully the web guide as public now today will be used very often. And please, if you want to reach out to the people that were in the call today, you can also find them through the web guide, where you can where there's contact persons per firm should you want to reach out and ask questions or discuss some of the topics that are mentioned in here. And we're very much, well, I'm not sure if we should be looking forward to the next discussions about AMLD6, but I do look forward to collaborate with you on the next project. So let's look at that together. For now, I just want to point out that there's the option to go networking. If you push after the session has ended on the left side on the button networking, you get introduced to one of the people that are in the call. I would definitely recommend you to do that. And like to highlight that in a little over a week, we have the next meetup online, where we'd very much like to invite you. You can check out everything that we do via hollandfintech.com, and our events are there on the /event side. Hope you have a lovely Wednesday, and see you all soon. Thank you very much.
Don, and thank you all. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Don.
Likewise. Thanks.
Bye.